Are there any objections to the minutes? Any corrections, deletions, additions?
I move approval.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much. Okay, Debbie, you have the floor.
All right. Well, this is one of those days where we'll be finishing up the financial statements for fiscal 17 in this meeting and talking about the budget in the next meeting. So before I turn this over to Andrew from CLA, I just wanted to recognize Michael, and in the back here we have Julie, Lucas, and Shpresa for all the work that they did in putting the CAFR together. Shpresa, this is her first year working on the single audit, so I know that was a learning experience and very good. And Julie, of course, is our accounting manager and has worked diligently. And last night she said, "Please, are there any more questions?" And I said, "I can't promise that." But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Andrew Laughlin, who is one of the partners at CLA and is going to do a presentation. Oh, you got it?
Good morning, Andrew.
Good morning.
So I second Debbie's comments. Appreciate management team for getting everything that we need, and no, definitely not, questions are not over. They never are. They always come from the auditor at any given moment, so always be prepared for sure. I'm Andrew Laughlin, principal of Clifton Larson Allen. I hail out of our Tampa office. I lead our state and local government practice for the Tampa Bay area. I'm the lead engagement partner on this audit for the year ended September 30, 2017. Just have a quick 5 to 10 minute PowerPoint presentation, similar to what I've done in prior years with you all. Very open-ended, so feel free to ask questions at any time. And any discussion points I get into, management folks, please feel free to come in, augment the discussion as you see fit for whatever you like. So one good thing about this CLA engagement team, it's a recurring team. This is I believe our third year. Is our third year? Third year doing the audit. So we've got the same core audit team members. We've also incorporated some additional specialists into the team that have come in for this specific audit. I'll talk about that in a few slides forward. But the primary audit team, from the principal to the director and senior IT manager, and the AU agreed upon procedures team for the National Transit Database submission, all the same folks there, so we've got a good understanding of the authority and its operations and its finances, so it makes for a good, efficient audit. No real difference here in terms of the reports that we have to render. Sometimes the Auditor General's office goes a little crazy and says you got to include this new examination report or this big change to the management letter. Nothing that we've seen from 2016 to 2017 that's going to make our reports look any materially different. So largely the same there. An opinion on the financial statements, an opinion on federal and state compliance. Federal is your federal single audits. State is state single audit, plus some additional report requirements from the Florida Auditor General, namely a management letter and an examination report on our opinion on investment compliance. And these are what the reports are that they look like. I say reports to be delivered, and then initial results of the audit, I do say tentative. I'd say we're about 95 to 98% complete with the audit. We've submitted a CAFR draft to you all. We're just in final phase of wrapping up all remaining questions, issues on the audit. It goes through a second partner review process later this week and early next week. So then by next week, the board meeting, we expect to have everything finalized. So on final board approval, we finalize this CAFR document, issue the report, crack open the champagne, and call it a year. So again, this is tentative, but as of now, we have no real major findings to report, which is great. Either on the single audit, management letter, or examination report on investment compliance. That's pretty easy because the authority doesn't have a big complex investment portfolio, so no issues of non-compliance with its investment policy.
And that was my favorite slide, by the way.
Debbie takes pride on this one.
Yes.
This is what our CFO considers her personal report card, an A+ here. Just some highlights of some of the types of procedures we perform. You know, we have a single audit, so it's not just auditing the numbers. That's of course very important, and we do that, make sure that actual statement of net position and statement of activities are fairly stated in all material respects. We audit the numbers for sure. We also do audit procedures over internal controls, both over the financial reporting process and then also over the grants process, and we test compliance over the grants for the major programs and projects that we test. We had one major federal program that we tested, and then one major state project that we tested, the state block grant, which comprises, you know, about 80% or so of all state expenditures. So we did single audit testing on those major program and project. We also evaluate internal controls and do understand key controls, do walkthroughs of those controls, test those controls over all the significant transaction processes of the entity. So that includes managing their cash investments, their inventory of supplies, revenues, receipts, both passenger fare revenue, property taxes, grant revenue, other revenue, and then your AP, your disbursements, so both payroll disbursements, how they process payroll, get it out and make sure it's complete and accurate. We call our AP disbursements, so that's all other payments to vendors for the purchase of goods and services. And in other particular areas like capital assets, making sure they're capitalizing the right amounts, their disposal policies, their capital asset management policies, we look at all of that. Their self-insurance process around risk management, and then just overall their financial closing reporting process. How is their year-end closing process? What do they do? You know, what kind of checklist do they have to make sure that the CAFR document that they produce and the trial balance that they produce for us to audit is complete and accurate as well. So we do testing on all of that. Again, we had no material findings to report from our procedures. Then we also, what we try to do is what we call an element of unpredictability procedures. So every year we come in the audit, we don't want to be overly predictable and just say, hey, here's the same request list as last year. We're going to do the exact same audit procedures as last year. A lot of it is repetitive, of course, by nature of the annual audit. But there's also some things we want to try to come in and do that might be a little bit different or unique to catch the team off guard. So one thing we did was just an unpredictability test, a contract to invoice review. We did this for just pulled certain vendors for kind of typical recurring operating purchases of goods and services. So fuels, tires, we had HVAC services, fleet services, even office supplies, and we try to compare, is there any kind of pricing agreement or contract that's in effect, either a single year, multi-year, and then let's compare that to the invoices and make sure that, first and foremost, that the authority is not getting overcharged for anything. And so we do that comparison, make sure that there's no anomalies. We just found one very minor issue, and we're currently working with the management team on resolving that. That's just an HVAC installation. The service provider had a contract rate of $80 an hour as standard, but the invoice showed $100 an hour. So it's not material, nothing big to blow up about, but just something we'll look into. But that was the purpose of the procedure, make sure that there's no discrepancies between contract and invoice. And so that's what we did for our element of unpredictability procedures. We also are doing some additional work with the authority on the federal grant procurement side. We're going to be looking at 216 procurements from federally funded sources over a 3-year period, and we're actually going to pull those grant files and ensure that those files have all the necessary documentation that's included as required by applicable laws and regulations. So we'll be doing that. We're going to kick that off in early April. We've got Procurement Director Al Burns here. Al, is there anything you wanted to mention to that, or that sounds good?
I'm so happy for that. Really
Al wanted to look at all 216 files by himself because he's got all the time on the week. But we're going to help him with that and do some audit work on those specific files as their triennials coming up. So it'll help get things prepared on the procurement end. So looking forward to starting that work on April 3rd. So then I mentioned, our core audit team. Well, we also have a number of specialists within the firm that kind of focus on certain niche areas or disciplines that we like to integrate into our audit team. And Debbie asked, where do these people come from? But again, we've got a 5,000 plus person firm, so if I'm looking for something, there's probably somebody within the firm that can do it. And we have, in this instance, we took a little harder look at the authority's HR practices. So we have an HR consulting and outsourcing team within the firm that just came in and did kind of a sweeping look at HR and benefits, administration, how things are done, any recommendations that we can find for possible improvement. Our consultant that did the work praised the authority for all the good work that's done in that area. Just had a couple minor little things of best practice recommendations that she gave. We met with HR representative was it last week or the week before to go over some of those things. Just a couple highlights here. One is just as a periodic employee file audits. So whenever there's a status change, you get a pay rate change or other, maybe demographic change in a particular employee, that typically goes through a standard process that includes a review process from HR and getting into the system correctly. But just to make sure that nothing gets missed, either on active employees or terminated employees, maybe periodically would be a best practice, whether it's quarterly, monthly, annually, semi-annually. Just pull a sample of files and just compare what's in their personnel action form to what's actually in the system, and just kind of do periodic audits just to make sure that there's no discrepancies between employee files and what's actually in the accounting system for each employee that's selected. So that's a best practice that we recommended. Also, just periodic review of job descriptions and FLSA status. The Fair Labor Standards Act, we want to make sure we're FLSA compliant. So whenever there's an onboarding process, whatever the job description is for that employee is either exempt or non-exempt based on what the nature of the description of the job. Also, would be a best practice to go back and just periodically review those job descriptions just to make sure they're in the right bucket and are truly FLSA compliant. So that was another recommendation that we had, but overall didn't have any major findings in that area. Anything else from the management side want to add, or that sounds good?
You know what, I will add one thing. Just on every year, CLA comes in and does something different, not just the element of unpredictability. But this is important to us as an added feature, but at no added cost. This is just embedded in what they do every year. And of course, last month, Andrew will be talking a little bit about the healthcare plan, and we brought that up last month, that having a great resource here to be able to take another set of eyes at it with a fresh look, with no vested interest in it, to say, how can we make this better? So this is sort of a non-traditional type of review that's just included in our audit fee.
Yep.
So I appreciate that.
Well, maybe we can talk about that as potential.
Well, no, we can't.
Hey, try to slip that in. So yeah, just stemming from what Debbie said, the second piece that we did, we have a healthcare team that really just specializes in reviewing self-insured medical plans for all of our clients. So at audit team's discretion, they can bring in these team members to just take a look at the health plan administration practices, interaction between staff and the third-party administrator, the claims processor, what kind of information is being fed, how is the plan being managed, anything that we can do a little bit different, a little bit better in order to reduce those healthcare claims costs. So just a couple things that we found on that. The authority's health plan is a little unique in the sense it's a Cigna minimum premium plan, and that the authority is self-insured up to a certain aggregate claim limit. In FY17, it was $6.2 million. So the authority was on the hook for all claims incurred up to that $6.2 million. Then reinsurance kicks in, so then anything over that is covered by the insurer. So by legal definition, this is considered a fully insured plan, but it's got a significant self-insured component to it. So what we wanted to do is say, hey, in a typical self-insured model, there's certain drug rebates, for example, that self-insured employers are entitled to. So when an employee purchases a brand name drug, there's a rebate attached to that comes back to the employer that reduces its costs. Well, under this arrangement, all of those drug rebates are going back to Cigna, to the TPA, not to the authority. So we feel that there's some negotiation work that can be done in the next go-round of contract negotiations to include that caveat in there, say, hey, we're self-insured up to $6.2 million. We should be entitled to some of those rebates for the drug purchases that our employees are consuming. Not to mention, in a typical self-insured model, there's also certain performance guarantees that the employers hold the claims processor accountable to. So, how quickly when a phone call is made is that phone call answered? So there's certain metrics that get measured to make sure that that TPA is doing its job properly and delivering good service. And in those instances that it's not, there's certain financial compensation that would be due to the employers. We feel that that should also be incorporated into this contract on a going forward basis. So certain things to bring at the negotiating table at the next round, that's what we evaluated here. The other piece is just pharmacy claim activity monitoring. I think we saw some really great reporting on the medical side, less so on the pharmacy side. So just getting some tailored reports as to maybe the highest claims, pharmacy claims by individual. And then when you be able to evaluate that data, we can make better decisions on wellness and other things to try to bring those claims down for a particular subset, a group of our maybe higher offenders. So some better claim activity monitoring that we can do to help reduce claims costs in the future. Any questions on that?
Actually, yes. With other companies with similar plans, what kind of formula do those companies have with regard to the prescription rebate, drug rebate allocation between in this case, Cigna and PSTA?
I mean, certainly it varies by contract to contract, but we could certainly put some benchmarking analysis together and provide it to management to give maybe further, fuel to say, hey, here's what some of what we're seeing in the market that can help kind of maybe monetize that a little bit better, so they can know what they're asking for. I don't have that data. I don't know that off the top of my head, but yeah, we can certainly do some benchmarking on that.
Thanks.
Okay. We issue what's called a governance communication letter at the close of the audit, along with the final issued CAFA with all of our reports. And so that letter will state if there's any significant disagreements or issues in dealing with management. We have none, fortunately. No fist fights, none of that at all. We list any corrected, uncorrected misstatements. So we had no major misstatements that we uncovered throughout the audit. That's also great. We had a very small, what we call a past adjustment that we determined was immaterial, that management actually brought to our attention, just regarding the recording of a receivable and payable associated with a grant-related expenditure that's subject to reimbursement. So the revenue and expense was booked, but not the receivable and payable. No true net position impact anyways, just kind of a gross up of the balance sheet. And the amount was immaterial, $33,000, so management decided to pass on that, and we concurred that it's immaterial. So that was the one past adjustment we had in the audit. One other recommendation that we did make to management says here, place heightened scrutiny on funding received from federal or state agencies in which the award contract or agreement does not specify a CFDA or CFSA number, and obtain written clarification from the granting agency as to whether the award is subject to federal or state single audit. So in this instance, we did have a joint participation agreement, or JPA, with FDOT. This was for the Central Avenue BRT, the Bus Rapid Transit Study. There was no CSFA number on it, so we were, the authorities were a bit confused on what it might be, but definitely thought it was grant-related, and then did confirm with FDOT, yes, there is no CSFA number, but then when we obtained the JPA, and there was an Exhibit D that said, with regard to applicability to the Florida Single Audit Act, it did say NA. So that brought further confusion on, well, is this really truly considered a grant or no grant? So at that point, we worked together with the authority to get final clarification from FDOT on whether or not this belongs in the CEFA and whether or not it would be subject to single audit testing, which was the initial indication given to us. So after that back and forth, it was determined that this is not grant related. This is strictly a reimbursement for expenses for FDOT that PSTA is undertaking. So just in the future, when those types of scenarios happen, let's just make sure we know exactly the grant ID number, and if it's not known, let's get a very clear understanding of whether or not this is truly a grant or other type of intergovernmental revenue, because that definitely impacts our single audit testing. So we've got that squared away now and on a going forward basis. New, current, upcoming accounting standards. We've got GASB number 75. This is for accounting financial reporting for post-employment benefits other than pensions. That's called OPEB. The authority does have OPEB recorded as a liability on its financial statements. I believe that's, don't have that on top of my head, like, oh yes, sorry, I do have that. That is $2,458,441. Well, that's going to change next year because that was measured under GASB statement number 45. Now we're going to be in next year under GASB statement number 75, which is a new way of measuring the liability, very similar to how they do it with pension. So if you recall, we've had these long drawn-out discussions in prior years, the past 2 years, about the new pension standard and how it's created this new liability of, well, $30 million on the authority's books as of 9/30/17, and that was implemented back through 2014. And so the way that pension liability is measured, they're now taking that guidance and moving it over to the realm of OPEB. So OPEB is going to get measured differently. So instead of a net OPEB obligation, we're going to have a net OPEB liability. Financial presentation will be the same. You'll just see the amount increase. What will the amount increase by be? I can't tell you that definitively. Evaluation by an actuary has to take place to measure that, but I can tell you the unfunded actuarial accrued liability, and there is no the authority doesn't fund an OPEB trust. They just kind of pay as you go. So they make retiree claim payments. The authority just makes the payments on an ongoing basis. There's no dedicated assets in a trust earning investment income to pay those claims. So the unfunded actuarial accrued liability measured by the actuary as of 9/30/17 was almost $6 million. Typically, as a rule of thumb, that net OPEB liability is going to be somewhere in the ballpark of that UAL. So you might expect to see, as a result of implementing GASB statement number 75 next year, the liability might jump up a few $1 million. More to come as the actuarial study takes place for FY18 when this new statement is effective. The other kind of big disclosure and GASB implementation that's effective for a lot of local governments, especially counties and municipalities, is GASB number 77, tax abatement disclosures. This occurs whenever a county, for example, abates the taxes of a company who maybe wants to expand its corporate facility in your jurisdiction. And so to incentivize that, you will abate the taxes for a period of a certain number of years, so that the amount of taxes abated or foregone in a specific year needs to be disclosed in the financial statements starting in FY17. So that's a new disclosure. It doesn't apply to PSTA here. They don't have any tax abatements, so it doesn't apply, but you do see it in local government financial statements for this fiscal year, typically for counties and municipalities, but not applicable here. Last thing I'll do is just go over some quick financial statement highlights, assets, liabilities, revenues, expenses, and then that's all I've got for the day. So I've given this kind of depiction to you all last couple years in my presentation, just kind of a multi-year trend analysis, just kind of see where things are heading. When I'm looking at this, I don't see anything that's really a whole lot different from current year to prior years, except, there was a bit of a jump in capital asset additions, as you can see, from 2.4 million to 13.9, almost 14 million. And as you can see, it's kind of cyclical. Like every 2 years, you see bigger jumps than not, and that just has to do with the purchasing process of revenue vehicles. So in FY17, there were 10 buses purchased. And of the capital asset additions, you had $6 million in bus purchases, $7.3 million enter what's called CIP, or construction in process. But some of that CIP related to actually the purchase of hybrid buses that were purchased at or near year end, hadn't been placed in service yet. There's still some customization that has to be done on those. That was about $4 million of the $7 million. The remaining of the CIP is mostly related to the regional fare box. You got the Central Avenue BRT that we mentioned, then some replacement of some AC chillers. That contributed to about the $7 million of CIP additions. So really the timing on the capital asset additions largely is due to when buses are purchased. On liability side, everything seems pretty consistent here. Net pension liability, I can talk to you all about that for hours. I'm sure you don't want to hear that at this point, but really that just has to do with the change in actuarial valuations. They're done annually from one year to the next. A lot of the year-to-year, year-over-year changes just has to do with expected investment performance and actual investment performance. So that creates deferred inflow and outflow changes and net pension liability changes. That's the biggest primary driver of changes in the NPL, or net pension liability, from one year to the next. The other big change I'm seeing here is in accounts payable, accrued expenses, and comp absences from $5.1 million to $10.1 million. Most of that really has to do with accounts payable. That went from $1.5 million last year to $5.8 million this year. And a lot of that has to do with just what I talked about in the previous slide, purchases of buses at or near year end. So expense incurred, payable, we have a payable at year end that didn't get paid for until after year end. So a lot of that's just due to a timing issue on when the buses were purchased and paid. So a bigger increase in AP drove that increase there. We also had a kind of a bigger compensated absence increase from $1.8 million to $2.4 million. That's kind of the other piece to that. The biggest one is accounts payable increasing. Last two slides for me here on revenues and expenses. On revenue side, you do see some continued decline in passenger fare revenue. Just have a decrease in passenger trips, 13.4 million trips total last year to 12.4 million this year. That combined with increase in trips on the transportation disadvantage discounted trips, that increased from 3.2 million to 4 million. So that plays into the revenue figure there. You can see ad valorem taxes increasing year over year over year. Big jump here from 16 to 17, so we've got an increase in property values as well as a millage rate increase. So that contributed to the ad valorem increase. And then federal, state, and local grant revenue, pretty consistent year over year. On the expenses side, kind of biggest increase here, purchase transportation. We had an increase in the DART program costs. More expenses incurred with Jolly Trolley and Care Ride. Those are our purchase transportation providers. Operations increased there from 33 million to 36 million. A lot of that's just wages, benefits, increase in staff-related costs. A lot of that is healthcare related. So again, we'll be working on some cost containment strategies that I mentioned previously going forward. And Debbie, I don't know if you want to speak to current claims activity that you're seeing in FY18.
Yes, on the healthcare side, as I mentioned last month, we're seeing a decrease in the amount of claims that we have for this year. So that's good news. Some of it has to do with the fact that we've got the high deductible plan, which is bringing down that average cost per claim. I think people are becoming a lot more conscious, like you mentioned on the pharmacy side. We've been pushing information out to our employees that you can go to Publix and different places and get some of your medications from an employee-facing side for free. It may cost us some, but it helps the employee to stay on a program that's required for their health. We're also going to be starting another weight loss program. If you remember, we all lost a little bit of weight last year. Some of us gained back a little. Others are very still competitive. We'll be kicking that off next month to lose weight, and that has helped us. We saw about a 28% decrease in claims once we started a weight loss program. So we're going to be trying that again as well. And
that's really all I have. You know, net position, that's just change from the difference from revenue to expense in one year to the next. So relatively consistent, a little bit of drop from 16 to 17. And that's what the trend looks like for net position. And so overall, that's what I have for my presentation. I'll field any questions if you all have them.
Yeah, Commissioner Johnson?
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew, for the presentation,
Sure.
the thoroughness, and I love the fact that you're going out and trying some things unpredictably, and kind of in that area, the HVAC contract, you said it's not significant. The contract rate was $80 versus the invoice, but what was the net difference on what the billing was and what it should have been?
I don't have a gross amount on that. I think we just looked at a sample of invoices. But that's something we'll look at with Debbie and Al to get resolved and see what the total impact is. I don't think they're spending much with that contractor, so I don't think it's.
It wasn't with the actual installation, I think it's with the HVAC repairs.
Yeah, more repair
Oh,
work, yeah,
okay.
ongoing service repairs, yep.
So it's less than $10,000 or something.
Yeah.
Something small. But
Any
it's
questions?
important because if we're doing it off of, we now use over the last year or so, year or two, we started a contracts module. So that oftentimes now we don't do a purchase order depending on what type of a contract it is. We pay off the contracts module. So before you'd have a PO that would say, in this case, $80. So if we got the invoice in, we clearly see it's $80. If you're doing against the contracts module, the people on the AP side don't necessarily see that kind of detail. What Al has recommended to do is to have all those invoices, anything paid off a contract, to add another check and balance in there by having it funneled back through the contracting officer to verify against the contract before it goes to AP. So we're going to add another layer of review in the process as well.
Any other questions? Commissioner Schulman?
You said no one wanted to talk about net pension liability. Don't ever say no one wants to, it makes me want to. So just a couple of quick questions, and I'm just about a year on the board, so some of it may be information known by others. But you said one of the main reasons that there's a difference in growing net pension liability is due to the fact of the expected rate of return versus the actual rate of return. Is that am I recalling that correctly?
Yep.
Do we know what the expected rate of return is?
We do, yeah, I can pull that up real quick.
And while you're looking that up, did I also understand that we don't have separate funds for pension liabilities? Is that, it would
That's
just come out of our
correct.
cash flow in the future?
That comes on a pay-as-you-go basis.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I would imagine that our investments are in the CDs and,
This is done at the state
Yeah,
level.
this-
Okay.
Because it's a Florida state pension plan.
Sure.
okay.
Yeah,
So-
just to clarify, this is a multi-employer state, Florida retirement system that the PSTA's employees participate in. So this is done at the state level. And then each participating employer just pays or is allocated a percentage of the total, and that's based on contributions.
Okay, so that's, and I appreciate that, that's what I was missing, because I don't recall seeing on the balance sheet from our actual holdings, that number, and was anticipating, well, we're earning, 1%.
Yeah, previous to 2014, it was just considered like, the accounting for it was just, hey, we remit payments to FRS based on pensionable wages multiplied by their applicable rate, so employees is 7-something%, and this is the cash that we remit, so we, incur expense on pension expense, credit cash. There's no long-term liability, because that's really the state's plan, not our plan.
Gotcha.
And then that's when Gatsby said, wait, hold the phone, what if this plan all of a sudden, terminates? Now we've got, an actually determined long-term liability, what we have to pay out all our retirees plus actives that will eventually retire. Here's what we have in assets. There's a shortfall. The state's not just coming up with a shortfall, all the participating employers do. So that's the liability component. In theory, that Gatsby said, we gotta allocate to all the participating employer entities, and that's how that was determined.
Okay, and the expected rate of return is set by the state, then? for that, or
That
do we have a
states-
hand in
The
helping to
rate of
determine?
return is set by the state, and kind of accepted by the actuary. We actually had some drama with that last year.
Actuarial
Um,
dramas.
Yeah,
It was
it's,
huge,
it's
actuarial
commonplace. So the actuary stated in the report, as Milliman, that, well, we think, kind of saying and reading between the lines, we think the rate's high, maybe too high. And so that has a significant impact on the potential NPL. And then the actuary later clarified to say, well, we think it's high, it's not against actuarial standards of practice, because that was determined by the state along with their investment consultants. And so there was some disagreement there, and that caused a whole lot of mess in terms of the audit. But that's the long-winded answer to your question, is how is the rate of return determined by FRS with its investment consultants?
Okay, thank you.
Commissioners?
Yeah, well, I wasn't going to ask that question, but I'm glad you did. 'Cause that was-
That's how it works.
It kind of, I wasn't quite sure of the mechanics and how it works, so I was going to ask it later, but that was great to do that, so thank you. And I really like the additional services, or the once-over of our departments, the HR and this year and the health plan. I think those are really kind of a nice value-added thing to do.
It is, and last year we looked at procurement card policies, because that's one of those things that could get you in the newspaper if something's not done properly. So one of my emphasis when we looked at all the accounting firms was to have an emphasis on internal controls and, making sure that our processes are good, especially on the control side. So I don't know what it'll be next year, this year, because health was very important with the growing cost, but we'll pick something else.
I don't know
Yeah.
what it'll be either, but
We'll figure
better get
something
busy.
fun.
But I think the audits, we shouldn't be ever afraid of them, because I really do think for the most part they help us through things. Unless there's something wrong going on, then really nothing to fear, and this is only a helpful thing. I think it really helps us improve, so I'm really glad you guys.
Right, and if there's something wrong going on, we want to know.
We know
about
that
it.
too,
Yeah,
yeah.
right.
And then finally, it's always good to have a little humor in an auditor, so appreciate your presentation as always.
I do my
I've heard
best.
them before, but
Yeah.
you do a good job, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Commissioner Johnson?
Thank you, and it's kind of, when the CAFR gets reported, the CAFR shows the liabilities for other pension liability, or the OPEB.
The CAFR shows a net OPEB liability and also shows a net pension liability. These are two separate line items within the CAFR.
So does that, on the CAFR, does that reduce the net assets or of the agency?
It does reduce net position. So if you look back at,
The last slide.
yeah, let's look at the net position slide here. So look at 2013 was 37 million. And then you got 2014, you're like, oh my God, what was Debbie spending? But really that 37 to 18 was due to the implementation of GASB number 68. And so that liability all of a sudden got thrown onto the financial statements that year. Every other year subsequent to that, really what changes in that position is just the change in the liability from one year to the next. So the real big hit was the year of implementation. So for OPEB purposes, as I mentioned, the transition to 75, there will be a hit and potentially a restatement of beginning net position as of the beginning of the year to take into effect the increase in the liability. And then every year subsequent, it's just going to be the change in liability from one year to the next, which could be positive or negative.
So next year's unrestricted net position will be $3 million less, is that what, or something in that order?
Conceivably, and depending on the materiality, again, this is something we'll discuss with Debbie and team, depending on how big the increase in liability is. We can either say it's not material and kind of flush that through current operations, current expense, or we could adjust our beginning net position. So this 2017 balance is now set 18.8 million. That might change if we implement, when we implement 75 and we restate beginning net position. So that 18 could go down by the beginning year impact of adopting this new accounting standard.
My question was just to make sure that we're not going to end up with a unrestricted net position that's negative.
No, because you've got a lot of almost 19 million of net position, and I anticipate The impact of OPEB will just be a few $1,000,000 increase in liability, which yes, will reduce net position, but not to put it into a deficit position.
And I was going to say, the purpose of these GASB pronouncements, when they've implemented them, is for transparency to the readers of the financial statements to say, what if the state of Florida ceased to exist tomorrow, and this pension plan ceased to exist for whatever reason? You know, what would be our liabilities? To just put it out there is food for thought, because when it comes down to it, what is the, you know, we know what it may be, but is it going to actually happen? Probably not.
Sure.
But it's just a transparency to the readers, and government, of course, is trying to be very, very conscious of that.
Well, and likewise for OPEB, it almost seems a little
Same.
silly to have a $6 million plus liability when actual retiree participation in the authority's plan is nil. I mean, I think it's maybe 10, 12 retirees. So the participation is not very high amongst retirees in the plan. A lot of big reason for that is based on your employee demographics. A lot of time they work until becoming Medicare eligible, and they just never get on the plan, on the authority's plan. Nevertheless, the actuary doesn't just look solely at current retiree participation. It takes into account active employees currently that may potentially be retiring and joining the plan in the future, and so that's how the liability is measured.
Any other questions? I have a question. The allocation for pension liability, that's for salaried employees, not for union employees, is that correct?
All employees.
Is that for all employees?
It's all employees that participate in the full retirement system. So there are certain employees that are student co-op that wouldn't, but as far as I know, the bus drivers are FRS eligible.
Okay, they are in it. Okay.
Yeah, and that can be exempt or non-exempt. Doesn't matter
Okay.
your
Okay.
status.
All right.
But there's some aspects of earnings that are pensionable versus non-pensionable.
All right, thank you very much.
All right, hey, appreciate everybody's time. Thank you.
Okay, next on our roster,
Well,
We have to take action.
what?
yeah, we
Oh,
take,
what?
I
take
would-
action to
Oh,
I would-
accept the audit.
I would move, we
Recommend.
recommend to the board to accept the audit. I think that should be an action item rather than a consent agenda.
I second.
I'll second.
okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. All right. Now, Al. Sorry, didn't mean to jump the gun.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Al Burns, Director of Procurement, PSTA. In January, staff brought before you Voice of the Customer. That was one of 3 surveys that went out in one comprehensive solicitation. It contained Voice of the Customer, employee survey, and customer sentiment. Voice of the Customer and customer sentiment, the data rolls into the agency's organizational scorecard. So what staff did, along with HART, we looked for a contractor to conduct a sentiment survey to measure the community's perceptions about the role of PSTA in the community and the success of PSTA at meeting transportation needs. The survey will be a baseline with ongoing future surveys planned to measure changes in sentiment. As I mentioned before, it all rolls up into the organization performance scorecard. This was a joint solicitation, as mentioned before, and we focused on cost savings through pooling, not only from negotiations or discussions, but also with pooling HART and PSTA resources. In September, we released the RFP. We received 2 proposals in October. The proposals were technically evaluated in compliance with the solicitation provisions. And the evaluation committee consisted of both both PSTA and HART employees. The overall ranking was HCP ranked number 1 over TransPro, and after discussions, procurement staff was able to successfully negotiate lowering the cost by 6%. The fiscal impact is $165,000, funded by PSTA's operating budget. Bottom line up front It's approximately $33,000 a year to have the surveys conducted. The recommend approval of a 3-year contract with 2 one-year options with ACP Associates, and recommend authorizing the CEO to exercise the 2 one-year options. If there's any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer.
Any questions? Yes, Commissioner Eggers.
It says after negotiation, the agency was able to reduce. So when the first bids came in, HCP was still the preferred?
Yes, sir.
And then you went back and asked for some additional?
Yes, sir. Traditionally, is kind of our best practice here at PSTA is not just to look and analyze the proposal cost, the proposal price that's come in, to see if we can get anything better.
Okay. I just make sure that we did it in that order, that's
Yes,
all.
sir.
So that's great, thanks.
Hey, Commissioner Schulman?
Do you know what the technical differences were between the two that resulted in the different score?
I don't have that information in front of me, but TransPro, that firm, they scored technically higher than ACP, but I don't have the evaluation breakdown in front of me, sir.
Okay, but it was also felt by staff that that was not a significant difference in the ultimate delivery
Correct.
of the end product. So
Correct.
we're still getting what we want out of it.
Yes, sir. We wouldn't just take, for lack of a better term, someone just lowballing
Mhm.
in order to get a contract. We do look at the technical aspects in the evaluation, and that is fully vetted by the evaluation committee.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Scott?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So it says, PSTA is looking for a contractor, let's see, to conduct a community sentiment survey to measure community perceptions about the role of PSTA in the community. How are they, I mean, are they asking riders, are they asking general public?
Very good question, sir. Voice of the customer, that survey right there, that surveys the actual riders. The purpose of the community sentiment survey is to survey non-riders and see what their perception is. And it's an effort to, for lack of better terms, maybe Cindy can elaborate, but to gain ridership and just to see what the perception of the community is.
Phone or online, web, email survey.
So it's
Non-riders.
Online web?
The means hasn't been decided
Probably
by.
mostly phone, but there's some, I guess, new ways of doing things besides the phone. That'd be on me, but
I mean, do we have an idea of the percentage of the community they're gonna survey? I mean, is the cost based on the number of people they reach out to, or the number of responses they get, or?
I'll let the project manager.
Hi. So when were developing the scope of work for the RFP, we did ask for a firm who specializes in this type of work and can be able to tell us what is the statistically valid sample size that will be needed to get good usable results. So I don't know the actual number, but this firm specializes in providing this kind of work. And at the first time we meet with them, we'll be making all of those decisions, whether it's phone or online or combo, what is the actual number of people they're going to be targeting.
Okay, any other questions? All right. Now, is this an action item that we have to, okay, do I hear a motion?
I would move to recommend approval by the board. I would think this could go under consent.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, Mr. Bennett. Thank you. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
No.
Okay. One opposed? Okay. All right.
Any particular reason?
I think it's a waste of money.
Oh, okay.
We can get that information by looking at our ridership reports.
Okay. All right. Anything else from you, Al? You're
No,
all-
sir.
Okay, good, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Commissioner, Community Service Partnership, Cindy.
Good morning again. I'm Cindy Raskin-Schmidt, the Director of Communications and Marketing here for PSTA. So at the end of your last board meeting, Mr. Scott had asked for some more information about our community service partnerships and how we go about selecting which events to participate in. So I put together this presentation to give you an idea of how we do that. So first of all, what is a community service partnership? It's a park and ride service that's provided to large crowd community events along existing routes within existing service hours. Here's an example of Clearwater Jazz Holiday, which is one that we've done for several years. So we partner with community events for a couple of different reasons, primarily to help them alleviate traffic and parking concerns that come with large crowd events, where you have a huge crowd of people suddenly coming to one space that isn't ordinarily designed to handle that kind of traffic or parking. So we do it to help the communities in that way. It also gives us the opportunity as PSTA to reach out to the community, work on improving that community sentiment score that we'll be working on to give people who wouldn't ordinarily ride public transit a very positive public transit experience, and an opportunity to partner with the cities and the municipalities to provide these kinds of services. So how do we find opportunities? A couple of different ways. Some of our staff has worked closely with different municipalities in the past, and when they see that there's a large event coming up, we can reach out to them, or they can reach out to us and say, hey, we have something going on here, what can you do to help us? Here's some examples of some of the partnerships that we've had in the past few years, just some little logos there. St. Pete Pride, Dunedin Blue Jays, the Hispanic Heritage Festival in Clearwater, Clearwater Jazz Holiday, as I mentioned. So when we take the call or make the call, we evaluate the event over several factors. When is it? Where is it? Is it along a bus route? Is the bus service that's existing in the area, the time match up with what the event would need? Is there a large parking lot where we could designate as a park and ride service? Will the partner assist in promoting the service? Because that's very, very important. And then, of course, do we have enough lead time to put together a successful program? The partner does have some responsibilities. We ask them to usually identify the parking lot. The example of Clearwater Jazz Holiday, we worked closely with the city of Clearwater, and they identified the Joe DiMaggio Field as a parking location, and we have a bus route that goes by there. So for Clearwater Jazz or Hispanic Heritage or Sea Blues, any of those kind of festivals, we can put out the signs and have people park there and ride into downtown Clearwater. We also ask the event organizer to work closely with our staff to help coordinate the service, help put out signs, help identify the right places to put the signs, things like that. And then, of course, as I said before, we need them to help promote the service. So it needs to be on their website, in their social, in their ads that they're doing to tell people that there's park and ride service available. Here's some examples of some recent partnerships. I mentioned Clearwater Jazz Holiday, Hispanic Heritage Festival. Those are on the Route 76. Pride in downtown St. Petersburg was huge last year. It was along the Route 5. We partnered with the Pinellas County School Board, allowed us to use the parking lot at St. Pete High. There's hundreds of parking spaces there. We were able to transport people on the Route 5 into downtown St. Pete for the parade. Blue Jays spring training. Of course, there's the spring break partnership with the city of Clearwater and Clearwater Beach, which is a long one. That one's 10 weeks. Beach Cross Bay Ferry is one that was happened for a few weeks for that test in St. Pete. So all of these are examples of partnerships that we've had in the past. We do say no sometimes if it's not along a bus route, if there's not service to the area. Clearwater Jazz and Hispanic Heritage Festival this last year, we actually didn't provide service because the Joe DiMaggio Field was full of Irma debris, and we couldn't identify another parking lot that was along the route, so we didn't provide service for that particular one. Now, most of these, as I said, since they're along existing bus routes, and they're only 1 or 2 day events, there's usually no additional cost required except for marketing and signage. So the key here really is partnering with the local communities and being able to provide this public transit service to the communities that need it and the events that need it. So I'm happy to answer questions.
Questions? Commissioner Eggers?
Just real quick, and after the event review, is that pretty normal too, to see did it actually perform?
Yes, we do. We work closely, marketing team works closely with transportation, with Jeff and James and their group, and talks with them after the fact to find out, you know, how was it? Do we have enough spaces in that parking lot? Is it a good location for the future? Any kind of need.
Do we get a sense of ridership use? I mean, the actual use?
Yeah, we usually do. I mean, some of these are higher than others, like Pride. We know we had several thousand people that ride. Spring break last year, you know, the beach services combined was 200,000-ish riders for the beach routes during spring break. Clearwater Jazz Holiday is several hundred people that take advantage of that, so we do take a look at that.
And you said something about it being on the route of a of a bus route.
Yes.
So these are additional buses set aside for this event, or buses that continue doing their route and?
These buses continue doing their regular route.
Right.
So Route 5 is an example for Pride. So Route 5, I'm not sure what's the regular frequency of Route 5, but if you have 100 people staying at the bus stop, you know, we have standby buses for recovery for other things, like if there's a breakdown, and if you need to put that bus in there to handle that extra load, it's still along the route, it's still within the scheduled timing, it all happens.
Most of these that have a particular start time, we do add vehicles to the route to make it more frequent.
Okay, I guess that wasn't figuring, hadn't getting the right question out, but I guess that's really what, because I was thinking about the Blue Jays thing, if you did the regular Jolly Trolley, you got lots of people just waiting,
Yeah.
and waiting, and waiting, because it doesn't come that frequently, so.
Right, so the Jolly Trolley puts another trolley, supplements a trolley just for the segment in Dunedin.
Got it,
Um,
okay.
That runs from about 11:30 to 1 on the days of the games that they have.
Okay.
They are right now making sure people get picked up every 12, 15 minutes.
Okay, good, so
Okay.
the head time, all right.
Yeah.
Headway.
Commissioner
And what percentage of the requests would you say are yeses? Do we get 100 requests, 90 are yeses, or?
Yeah, probably,
Okay.
yeah.
Of the ones that are on a route.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, if they're not on a bus route, then we can't do it.
I know, but so is that the percentage that we were just saying? 9 and 10, we say yes to, because they're on our route, or?
A lot of them are repeats, a lot of them are yearly events.
Right.
That
That are doing well and-
Yeah.
Yeah, so Clearwater Jazz, Pride will do again, Cross Bay Ferry, if that comes back, we'll, partner with them to provide service, and Clearwater Jazz, Hispanic Heritage. City of Clearwater does a ton of events in Coachman Park, so the Joe DiMaggio Route 76 combo works really well for a lot of those, when they know they're gonna have a huge crowd.
Commissioner Scott?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, Cindy. So, on the times that, we're just putting additional capacity on existing routes, and I think that's exactly what we should be doing. But there are times when we don't do that, and the one that's most recent that I'm going to focus on is the BMX, because that's not serviced directly by the Oldsmar connector or Route 67. And the Oldsmar connector only runs 6 days a week, it doesn't even run 7 days a week. So in that instance, we had a dedicated vehicle that ran a dedicated shuttle for a for-profit event between those 4 points, the hotels, the BMX park, and the parking lot at Oldsmar City Hall. So we provided that service for free, correct?
I believe we did.
Yes.
Do we know how many people rode that?
Was it 100?
We had 76 riders.
76 riders over 3 days. Did those 76 riders qualify as transportation disadvantaged?
I don't know. I wouldn't
We
have that
didn't do any
information.
means testing or anything to see if they were,
I would say that.
No.
if they were worthy of free service? We just decided.
We never ask anyone if they're worthy of free service.
So what made them, but we charged TD customers, right?
I'm not sure I
The
understand.
board
your-
has a
understand.
fair policy
Right.
that we voted on to have a TD bus pass.
Okay. So they pay something for the transportation, but these 76 people paid nothing.
That's right. And whatever the route, and whatever the ridership on the Oldsmar connector that day also paid nothing.
So the whole route ran for free, even though this bus, for those 3 days, because the connector doesn't run on Sunday. So everybody on that route rode for free for those 3 days.
During the period of those 3 days, this was along the Oldsmar connector route. And we can disagree on that, but,
Well, it doesn't run on Sunday, so we can definitely disagree on that point.
no, I agree with you on that. But we count the whole ridership on all of these, the pretty much all of these, I think, are free to the customer. And we count the ridership on the route, including the extra buses we might put out there are just added to the route, and we will get a total of the total ridership on the route for those days. And those, vast majority, I think, when these events happen, are going to the event, but then other people maybe get a free ride.
Well, the board has a say in all fair decision, particularly on the TD side. We've had a lot of discussion on that. You know, we don't provide free rides for transportation disadvantage. I don't think we should be providing free rides to people that are going to a for-profit event where clearly they're not transportation disadvantaged. So I think we have a conflict here. So I think the board, there should be a policy that the board should approve all services that are provided for free.
So let me ask you, to be specific on, are we talking about the end use or the entity that's making the request that separates the for-profit and not-for-profit? So, and again, this event here, if the city of Oldsmar asked for it, that's one thing. If the event, the BMX organization asked for it, that's another thing. Because, and I'm not trying to split hairs here. I'm just trying to understand that. And then I do understand. 76 riders in 3 days doesn't strike me as a lot. I mean, again, if it's that valuable to somebody, then maybe they pay for it. Especially if it's a for-profit thing. So I'm not quite sure. We have to talk through that.
In my mind, it's the end user, because on the TD side, it's the end user that's paying for it. I mean, if you get on a bus, if you want to go ride the bus now, you're going to pay for it individually. I mean, that's in my mind.
So we get back, and again, it's the same thing with the Blue Jays, because the end user is a baseball team that's definitely for profit. I don't know who made the request, if the Blue Jays made it or the city of Dunedin made it, because they have parking issues. So.
I mean, our fare revenues declined from 2013 to 2017, 45%. We've got major budget challenges. Why are we giving things away for free?
If I could just add, I understand, we did get contacted by the city of Oldsmar, by Mayor Beavis, former PSA board member, that they had reduced the amount of parking at this event, and it was going to be a significant draw, they thought, and they were going to have parking problems. They said, could we do a park and ride? And we said, well, it has to be along the route, and we would like your help in identifying a parking lot. So they identified a parking lot. What we found with most of these items is it does take a while. What we certainly found with the Blue Jays, certainly we had a lot lower ridership last year on it than we did this year. That the folks that go to those Blue Jays spring training games kind of learned about it last year, and then this year they're riding to every game. Last year they only kind of rode on the bigger games. And we saw the same thing with the Jazz Holiday too. If the board doesn't want us to run any service in Oldsmar, you don't have to, but I would recommend, there's so many different ways that we promote our fares and promote our services. We are getting calls by communities. I don't think we get that many calls from the actual, private entities that put on the events. We get calls from the cities. And I do believe this is part of our mission. We're not just for transportation disadvantaged low-income riders. Lots of those are getting free rides too.
I'm not suggesting that we are, but that is a good percentage of the ridership in Pinellas County. What I am saying is that when we're giving something away for free, we're hurting ourselves financially, okay? And those 76 passengers are no more thinking about public transportation today than they were before they got on that bus. Because all we did is demonstrate to them that there's no value to it.
Again, I don't view that as a lost fare revenue, because those 76 riders or the 20,000 people at the Blue Jays that are from Canada, they weren't going to ride. They wouldn't ride it if we didn't provide it, right? So it's not like we lost fare revenue from existing customers. We
But
didn't give away.
But we didn't gain it from new ones either.
So it's an opportunity cost, perhaps. We would have lost $200 or whatever.
But there's a cost from the additional service that we're providing, or in the Oldsmar case, there's no service. So there is a cost that you add up totally.
Right.
That is a loss. I mean, it's not a lost fare revenue necessarily.
Right.
Although, having that's what I was saying, if the end user found value in those 76 riders, he'd probably be willing to pay for it. Otherwise, he wouldn't. You know what I'm saying? So, I mean, I think there's something to at least understanding what those costs are, so that we know, or are we losing on all of these, all those that we did last year, did we lose $1,000 for the year? Did we lose $10,000? I'm not talking about fares, I'm talking about the actual cost of providing the additional frequency, or on a day that we didn't have a ride, like in Oldsmar, we added it. Now, I'm not really saying that we need to create a new policy, but I do think we need to understand what that is.
There should be some transparency on the costs and the amount of riders that we're getting.
So we are putting together a system that we can report to the PSTA board monthly at Mr. Raskin request, a listing of how many rides were provided that the customer did not pay anything. I mean, we already do provide you a monthly total on students or UPass and CPass riders where the university is paying and that they're not paying, or the hotel is paying and they're not paying. We already provide that, provide the TD, and we'll break out the free rides, which will include every time the bus driver presses the free button, which will be all these kinds of things around the county, but they'll also be free kids under 5 and
I mean, if I'm
other
a full
frees.
fare paying passenger and I'm going to work and I gotta pay full fare, I'm pretty irritated that somebody going to ball games ride for free.
Yeah. Well, you can express that in a Canadian way to those folks, I guess.
I have a question. Do we charge, so we have the spring break service now. Do we charge the hotels for that service? Do we charge restaurants for that service, for the park and ride service?
No.
Do we charge beach
Well-
vendors for that service?
No.
Okay, so it's provided as a community benefit because we felt as a community, there's value in not having as many cars on the road which would allow more people to get out there and experience what those for-profit entities have. So for me, it's not necessarily who the end user is, it's the, and I appreciate you switching to the slide, I'm talking about the value of the community. 76 riders, say it was, each one was a couple, let's say. So we're talking, over 35 cars that were not traversing that stretch and looking for parking and trying.
3 days, so it's 12.
It may have all been on one day, I don't know. I do disagree with the notion that any particular rider is no more likely to ride public transportation, having experienced that. I don't presume to know what riders are. To your point of surveys, that's one of the reasons why we do surveys, is to understand what people perceive and think and do, and that drives their behavior in using or not using a particular service. So I look at things like this as both what our community, a lot of the non-riders wonder, what do we get out of PSTA? Well, they get less traffic congestion. They get the ability to, when they want to interact with these features, they get to do that in a more easy way. So I think there's definite community benefit, and it's also a marketing benefit for people to be able to see what it's like to ride the bus. I would encourage us to make sure that we have more marketing materials on those routes, or even PST staff members on those routes talking to people about the bus in general and encouraging them and answering questions about how the bus service works. Personally, last year I used PSTA to get from my home to the Grand Prix in St. Pete on Sunday. The bus ran every hour. It did not have a partnership with PSTA. This year I did not, because the bus ran every hour. So I wound up driving to Tropicana Field and then taking a private shuttle. So my own personal experience would have been better using PSTA and not clogging up the roads and then interacting with the community in that way. So I think there's more value than just what each one person rides. To the point, if I was a full fare paying member, I appreciate people using the bus. I mean, as someone who's used the bus here and in other municipalities, I never looked at anybody else and said, well, what are they paying? What did I pay? Right? I paid a fare based on what I was trying to achieve for my own transit needs. And I felt that fare was commensurate with the value I was getting. I never then sat down and said, well, gee, I wonder if they're paying, are they paying $2 while I'm paying $5, or did they get on for free? And, you know, everyone makes those decisions independently. And where I think having at least a report of an accounting and transparency around what we're actually using and giving, I think that makes sense because it keeps questions from coming up and people have that information readily available. But without a doubt, almost echo your point. I think this is a community value, and we're a community-based organization. So
I concur with that.
And we do try to market these things as best we can. So in every one of my emails that I send to the board, the board fully knows of all these things. I hope they know that these are happening. We want to be transparent because we want people to ride them or know about them for them to be successful.
Just one final point. On the Sunday, the day that the connector route doesn't run, and we provided a bus anyways, assuming that the service was valuable and BMX or the city would have contracted that out, that was a day that a private sector driver stayed. There is an impact to the private sector when we do things that are off route and off schedule. And I think that also needs to be considered.
one final question, just for clarification. Did we run an additional bus on Sunday for the BMX, the Oldsmar connector?
Yes.
So that is something that is not normally run and was additionally run on that day?
That's correct.
Okay, that one particular point for me does pose a little bit of a problem in this other scheme. Not scheme in a nefarious way, but the structure. Because if we are not providing service to people who are not on routes, then for all intents and purposes on Sunday, there was no route. And so we created a route on that day for that event. So that point I will absolutely agree with. And whether it's, we partner and say we can do 2 out of 3 days, you're gonna have to find somebody else to do the third. Or it then opens us up to have people come back and say, well, you created a route for this organization. My program's not on this route. Why are you not doing it for me? So we need some consistency from a policy standpoint along that line.
But we are, I guess, getting back to the issue of whether we should or shouldn't do this. I'm not take that off the table for a minute, but we are going to continue to search and try to get numbers of riders and kind of a incremental cost that is associated with that event. So if we're riding 1 every hour normally, but in this event it's going to be probably 4 times an hour, there's an incremental cost. I just think we need to know what it is, because I think PSTA needs to receive kudos from these communities if we're not going to charge them. This was a pretty valuable service from a cost standpoint, and we do it because we want to do because we want to build partnerships in our communities. But so I think that's an important piece to let our folks know what we're doing if we are doing something of significance. So.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Cindy. Appreciate it.
Cindy.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I had a question.
Yes.
And I apologize for that phone call interruption. Kind of an unusual situation with a fellow that's trying to get a job after getting out of prison. But what is the frequency of reporting of the ridership on these special events? And I'm primarily looking at the beach route. Do we have the ridership numbers for by week?
On the Jolly Trolley routes and on the beach routes?
The free routes, the people that got on for free on those for the last month.
We get a daily, we get a We get a daily ridership, kind of like a gross report from the farebox system by route every day, and then we, for our services, we get a monthly ridership report from Jolly Trolley and our contracted services. So it just kind of depends, and then we go through a whole effort to audit that and validate it, and then produce it basically in almost real time. Usually the report is late last night that before you see it at the Finance Committee today for the prior month, it's all compiled. And what we're going to do from now on, well, hopefully next month, is add a little line on there that says, of the total rides for the month that you see on there now, this number that the customer didn't pay. So you,
Okay. The other one, it's free on the connector route only if they're getting on at that park and ride.
is that how it works?
Correct, yes. Yes.
Or
You're-
at
Okay.
the
You're
event.
correct. Yeah, if they got out of the Old Smart City Hall lot, they did not pay. That's correct.
Right.
That's where they came from.
Thank you.
The riders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Good morning. Well, perhaps in the interest of time, I might, we'll just have to see. I'll start my presentation, and then if the benchmarking thing needs to be pushed off till next meeting, we can do that. Even though today is Pi Day, so happy Pi Day, so it's good to have the audit and this benchmarking thing on a data-driven March 14th.
3.14.
3.14.
It doesn't stop there.
Yeah, right.
So I tried to combine, well, Commissioner Egger said he liked the auditor having a sense of humor, so. I've added a few things to the presentation. That's why I think we'll maybe just get through those and then see where we're at as far as the benchmarking. Commissioner Eggers asked at the last meeting after Mr. Rask asked some questions about how we exactly count ridership, just a little primer on that. And then we've all been discussing the declining ridership, and some studies have just come out very, very recently, finally, that have looked at that, and so I'm going to try to present that. So PSTA tracks all of its riders in accordance with rules that the federal government places. And actually, the federal government puts these same rules on airlines as well, where we track what are called unlinked trips. So that means that every rider riding a bus is counted as a ride. And so if it's a round trip, that's 2 rides. If the rider takes 2 buses because they transfer, and both ways, that would be 4 rides. It's very similar to like if you have a frequent flyer mile on the airplanes where you get your legs of travel and you get to count those. It's the same thing. But it gets a little bit more complicated after that. And the question that Mr. Rask identified, which I think, thanks to Cassandra and her team, I think he understands a little bit better now, is the Federal Transit Administration asks us to categorize different modes of travel amongst our ridership. Even though we commonly think we just run one mode, buses, they categorize the different types of buses in a couple different ways. First of all, they want us to track ridership on what they call directly operated service. That means our buses, or contracted service. That means Jolly Trolley or DART. And then they call different modes. Commuter bus, the ridership that goes over to Tampa, that's different than the rest of the service in their mind. They want us to track that separately. So that's commuter bus. Then there's a mode called demand response, which is where the bus comes and the service is provided based on demand, which is commonly we think of as DART, because that people call up and the bus comes and gets them. But it also includes the connector routes up in northern Pinellas County, the Oldsmar and the Palm Harbor and the Dunedin connector routes. Since those routes can deviate off the road, they do deviate off the main route and go back into the neighborhood on request and pick people up. That's put into the demand response category as well.
Is that the category you'd probably want to eventually try to put Uber in, those Uber rides?
Yeah.
It's demand response?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
That would be the goal. Right now, doesn't count. All this information is submitted to the federal government along with a whole bunch of other data annually to go into something called the National Transit Database. If you Google the National Transit Database, it's really a really neat thing where you can find data from every transit system in the country, and lots of consultants and everything use that all the time. I've been at conferences and heard presentations about it. It's really a unique thing that the United States does. Most other countries do not have a database of transit ridership. There's not a German or a French database where you can look up every city in France and compare. But you can do that here. And then, of course, that data is then used, part of that data is used to drive the formulas where we receive formula capital dollars every year to PSTA, and every transit system in the United States receives. All the data that goes into that formula is required to be audited. And that's why you saw that we get that data audited through our annual audit process. That actually does not directly include ridership. Ridership is not part of the formula directly. Passenger miles are, which is kind of like ridership. The board receives every month some different data. They receive total ridership accounted, summed up on the sheet that's in front of you. That's all those modes, all that data combined. So that was sort of the discrepancy that Mr. Rask identified. That's just a little bit of information on that.
Okay, so the trips that are listed here are or are not what we do with the FTA?
The total of all of our motor bus, commuter bus, demand response, and contracted equals that number.
Okay.
And I think Mr. Rask was looking at the National Transit Database, from my understanding. He was looking online at the National Transit Database, and he was picking out, I think, just the motor bus number only. And then once you explain, well, you add the demand response and the other things, then I think he got it. I don't want to speak for him. Okay. As we've been discussing, ridership is down and has been consistently down at PSTA for about the last 24 months. Just about 24 months, 23, 22 months. It's been down nationwide a little bit longer. PSTA didn't seem to have didn't hit PSTA as fast as it did the rest of the country. But it's just been recently. Transit systems all across the country have been asking what's going on with the ridership. Why is ridership going down? Keeping CEOs like myself up at night wondering why. But it's only recently that some studies have started coming out that have researched the data. And this is a listing of some of the studies that are underway. Some haven't come out yet or have been just recently completed. You may remember the name Dr. Steve Polzin. He is a researcher at Qatar at USF, and he was a former HART board member. A lot of the data I'm going to present to you, he has just released. He's doing a study for FDOT on the ridership just in Florida, which he hasn't actually published yet, but I saw him at a conference and grabbed some of his data too. So this is a map that Dr. Polzin put together that just shows the breadth of the ridership decline is virtually in every city. A few exceptions where they've either increased service a lot or done some of the streamlining that we've been talking about. So why is ridership declining? Well, to summarize the data that's come out recently, for a while lots of people thought that it was Uber and Lyft that were really eating into the ridership on transit nationwide, and that actually is being found not to be the case. There's been some studies, Uber and Lyft are not particularly open with their data, as we know, but some research groups have gotten some data from Uber and Lyft and found, I think, what we kind of know. The vast majority of Uber and Lyft rides are happening on Friday and Saturday nights, evenings in urban cores, short trips in the downtowns of cities across the United States where they're mostly restaurant goers or event goers in the downtowns. There's virtually no Uber and Lyft ridership in the suburbs of cities, and certainly very low Uber and Lyft usage to and from work on a daily basis. The only suburban ridership they could find was when the airport was located out in the suburbs, and then there's lots of Uber and Lyft rides to and from the airport. So in the case of most transit systems, including PSTA, that's not probably really having that major effect on our ridership. We still don't carry too many small, short trips, maybe on the Looper, but there's not that many trips that we're competing with Uber and Lyft just in downtown St. Petersburg or downtown Clearwater. So we don't think it's that. What some of these studies are coming out and saying is the biggest impact seems to be car ownership. When the recession hit in 2009 and 10, car purchasing plummeted. And there built up a demand for new cars and used cars. People weren't buying cars for a number of years, and that demand built up and is being met now with double-digit percentage increases in the number of car sales, new and used, in the last 4 or 5 years. Dr. Polzin's research has shown that every household, on average, a household that goes from 0 cars to 1 car reduces their transit ridership by 191 trips. And if you multiply the number of new cars in America since like 2010 by 191, you almost get to the ridership loss nationwide. You can do that math. Now that's not a scientific way to explain the ridership loss, but it is having a significant effect. There was another big study that just came out in December of LA County in Los Angeles, which it's a much, much bigger county with lots of different transit systems, all losing ridership. And they looked at what is happening in that county, and they were able to identify car sales by census block, and they found that the low income areas of Los Angeles, where transit ridership was highest, were actually increasing their car access greater than the overall average, with used car sales as well. Now, I've asked Dr. Polzin if he might be able to, under our last month, you might remember we agreed with Cutter on a MOU. Maybe he could do a Pinellas County kind of analysis, and he said that Florida doesn't really have very good data on used car sales by county. They have new car sales, but so he likes to track auto registrations. This kind of shows this a little bit in some detail. This is a graph of auto loans, loans made by year in total dollars, and then the different colors represent different credit scores of those who are taking out those loans to buy cars. With the lower credit scores, 620 or below, which, as you all probably know better than I do, is obviously related to your income level. So lower income folks get a lower credit score. That's this lower dark blue area. But you can see the recession, the number of auto loans, but has completely recovered. It's now about, from its low point in 2010 to now, it's 2.5 times as many loans are being taken out to buy cars now. And the growth in subprime loans below 620, lower income folks, is even greater than the overall growth.
Quick question. That's loan dollars, not actual loans.
Right.
Okay, so
Correct.
if you were buying a $10,000 car and then you went and bought a $70,000 car, it's still just one car, but it would represent a $60,000 difference.
Right.
Obviously, I'm being dramatic to make the point, but it's total dollars.
Right.
Bar. Okay.
Yeah. So what can be done about this? What measures could PSTA take to address this? Well, APTA has done one of the studies that came out, and they made 3 basic recommendations that I don't think are really earth-shattering. Improve time competitiveness, strengthen affinity bonds, and address external factors. Whoa, that's breaking news. So improve time competitiveness. Obviously, everything in our society is becoming more time sensitive. We all don't have enough time. So things like dedicated lanes, which I put a check mark there because we are working on initiatives related to dedicated lanes. The Central Avenue BRT, the proposed regional premium transit plan along the highway, will allow the buses to operate faster and be more competitive with cars, especially those that are sitting in traffic. The second thing is they recommend is straighten routes, increase frequency on core routes, have fewer meandering neighborhood circulators. I put a question mark there because we are again about to embark on a community bus plan effort, and we will largely, I'm sure the consultant will recommend certain straightening of routes, adding frequency to our core routes along the major highways of Pinellas County, and then maybe reducing services in lower ridership areas to pay for that. But as we all know, that's very difficult to do when even if it's a few riders come to the PSTA board meetings and complain because they have no other service. Now, so we're really trying to beef up our direct connect and other kinds of transportation alternatives for folks like that, but it remains to be seen how much we can do of that. Strengthen affinity bonds and customer loyalty. This is an idea that obviously transit riders are fickle, and if they, especially folks that can get enough income, they don't have, it takes them too long to get on transit, they will go and get a car, or they'll even get a used car. Can you create more loyalty amongst your riders? The APTA study suggested fare capping, which is a system, is sort of a complex idea, but rather than concentrating on selling different levels of passes or certain day numbers of passes, once we go to the mobile payment or the smart card, where people will have an account where they'll put money on the card and then they'll just ride and not necessarily know exactly how much they're paying on each individual trip, we can do something called fare capping, where the more you ride, the less you pay. That's the concept. That you start off, your first ride will be according to the base fare of $225, but then if you ride 10 times, the cost per ride will be less because you'll move up the ladder of how much the different passes cost. That can only be done with our new smart card system. The other thing that we're excited about that we could do now, we will be able to do, we can't do now, But they recommend doing different kinds of basically gaming or promotions, like you earn points by riding. People love this stuff, even if they just get a little sticker on their Starbucks or a star, and they don't hardly get anything of value. People like those kinds of programs. Can you win stuff or get stuff if you ride more? And right now we don't really have any way to do that because yes, people buy passes and we can track the pass number, but there's no way to track right now with our paper system that Brad had rode this number of times on this number of route, or whatever. We don't know that I have this pass and Mr. Barkley has that pass. But with the smart card, with the value storage system, we will know that. We will know that that card is Brad Miller's and he has ridden the bus 25 times this month, and we know what route he rode, and he rode to Starbucks 1,800 times or whatever. And then address external factors. Of course, these are issues that PSTA really has no control over, but they obviously do have an effect on ridership. Affordable housing. Pinellas County is certainly showing that, where the housing values, especially in areas where we have high transit ridership, downtown or St. Petersburg, Clearwater, the housing prices are going up and folks cannot afford to stay there. We see that with our own employees at PSTA. Some of our younger employees are trying to move into a bigger place and they have to move to Pasco County or someplace different to afford it. Reduce parking subsidies. Every time that we invest in public dollars in parking, that subsidizes the parking and makes it less competitive for transit. And then, just like we saw at the board meeting last month about the Route 444 and the gentleman from the St. Pete Housing Authority who was upset about us eliminating a service, where the St. Pete Housing Authority is located on the Gandy Boulevard access road is very, very hard to service. No matter what kind of vehicle or how frequently we operated, it's never going to have very high ridership there. It's just so difficult a place with such low density that obviously has an effect on ridership. And those are decisions that the cities and the counties we hope to work with on. I think since I'm already over time, I will stop there and we'll postpone the benchmarking discussion until maybe next month.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah. Good. Thank you.
Yeah. Any comments?
Questions? Okay.
I'm sorry, Mr. Johnson, that you will not get to see another benchmarking presentation during your life on PSTA.
I could come and sit.
I hope you will. I hope you will.
You get 3 minutes.
Right.
All right.
Okay. Thank you. If we're dismissed. Okay. 10 minutes late, but that's, I don't see our friends from the planning committee.
Just John.
Yeah. John's gonna have, John and I are on the planning committee, and we're the, all of the people.
Oh, you're on planning as well?
Yeah.
We'll have a good meeting with yourselves.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks.
Hi. Come in late, leave
Our
early.
fearless
How
leader.
you
Well, Richard, keep improving, my friend.
Yeah, all those events, 10 or 12 of them, we provided a bus, and the people who rode the bus rode for free. Were we not doing that to try to increase ridership?
Stimulate.
Why don't we take a bus on Monday to the Blue Jays baseball game and then charge on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and let them ride free on Monday. And see if the people who rode free on Monday will say, well, I saved on parking, I saved on driving, I'll pay the $2 on Tuesday. Does that happen?
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
I-
If I were
we
going
don't-
to
we
the
don't have
Blue
that.
Jays baseball game,
Yeah,
I'd
we-
ride the bus every day.
Right.
And I'd pay
Yeah.
$2 to $3 versus drive my car.
Yeah.
I'd be crazy to drive my car.
People would pay, just, lots of people don't have the
Isn't
$2.
isn't there parking,
No, it's-
a fee, a parking fee to park your car?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, the whole point is to develop partnership and also be a civic, civil citizen, you know?
And I agree, you know, when we have a 4-day event,
Yeah.
we might provide free busing 2 days, and then 2 days you charge. And see if
Well,
they-
like on that St. Pete Beach, down the beach,
Yes.
they do the sunset, they do the, like a musical thing, and they,
No good?
the county gives us
Not
access
going
to
in?
their parking lot there, above the Don Cesar.
That is fine.
And then they park for free, and then they just go down there to Pass the Grill to watch the
I'm not
sunset.
sure if they,
and music.
I'm not sure if they.
We don't really even add any.
Send those
When do we want to
Shuttles on it.
reconvene for our monthly meeting?
Send an email.
Whatever.
Want to.
You and I.